All right, y'all, welcome to the show. Got a bunch of stuff to get to today, so I'm going to lead with Jordan Peterson goes on Joe Rogan's show and surprisingly disagrees with Ron DeSantis. I am shocked by that because he's, of course, part of the Daily Wire, and Ben Shapiro is simping for Ron DeSantis over Donald Trump. I think Peterson runs in social circles that love DeSantis. I would have assumed he loved DeSantis, but he's got interesting point of disagreement. We'll talk about that. And then also, we will get to another day, another George Santos lie, and a new poll came out on his approval rating. That is amazing. So I'm going to talk about that as well. And then later on in the show, we have Mr. Beast curing 1,000 people's blindness, and the reaction to that might surprise you a little bit. There's a left-wing backlash to that, and they have a critique of it. I'm going to explain. Is the critique fair, or is it not fair? We'll get into that. And then Matt Gaetz wants to put work requirements with food stamps, which means if you're unemployed, you will not be able to eat. How populist of him. Remember, this is a guy who postures as a populist all the time. Very populist of him to say if you're unemployed, you shouldn't be able to eat. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it here. So Jordan Peterson goes on Joe Rogan's show. He's wearing kind of a goofy suit. I'm not going to lie here. The last time he was on Joe Rogan's show, he wore a tuxedo like he was in the movie Step Brothers. Very questionable. This time he's got a two-tone suit on. This back and forth is interesting. Let's listen, and then I'll break it down for you.
Idea that people don't understand, like the dangers of censorship. They don't understand where this leads to.
Yeah, well, we're seeing a little bit of that emerge on the right now, which is kind of frightening to me. So I'm an admirer in many ways of what's going on in Florida, with DeSantis. But him and Rufo, who I also think has got a bit of a clue, are trying to, what would you say, limit or even ban critical race theory. And the problem with that is you can't define it, right?
Right.
So how do you control something you can't define? And the answer is you battle it out on the battleground of ideas. Because as soon as you start to try to define it and then try to censor it, well, first of all, that's just going to grow because that's how those things work. Like where does critical race theory shade into Marxism? Well, who the hell knows? Where does Marxism shade into socialism? Well, that's an even harder question. And then where does socialism shade into, just being on the side of the working class? Well, all that's fuzzy beyond belief. And so once you get to the point where the government has to step in and regulate, say, what education systems are doing, you're already in deep trouble. And because I don't see how it can really be done. Because I can't define critical race theory. More or less you can get some sense of the cloud of ideas that's associated with it. But trying to draw the lines, how are you going to do that? And then, of course, you enable.
Wow. So that's surprising, man. That's surprising to me. He's saying, look, there's a slippery slope problem. If you say we're going to go after critical race theory, or we're going to go after, as DeSantis did, advanced placement African-American studies, they ban that. He's like, where does that end? Where does that end? You might not like some ideas associated with it, but if you just ban the class, this is the slipperyest slippery slope of all time. And then you agree in principle to when your ideological enemies get in there, they could just ban classes and ideas that they dislike. And that's not good. That's not acceptable. Because, and again, he's being consistent here, but others on the right are not consistent. We talked about it the other day. Ben Shapiro, Michael Knowles, they were like coming out and arguing in favor of book bannings. And it's like, well, hold on. You guys are the same people who you're always talking about how you love the First Amendment and you love free speech and you love free expression. And it's the left who are the authoritarians and they want to ban the books. And now on a dime, you flip and you're saying you want to do that. And so, look, credit to Peterson on this one. I mean, it's shocking that he's taking this position. And I would imagine a lot of his own audience is going to disagree with him here. I would imagine a lot of his own audience is going to say, no, critical race theory is bad. They're indoctrinating the kids into thinking all white people are racist, which, by the way, I'm sure that's not true. But this is what they believe, right? And so this is what they'll say critical race theory is. So let's listen to Rogan's reaction.
Inevitably, no matter what your goal is to begin with, you're going to control a certain form, let's say, of pathological communication, misinformation. That's just going to play into the hands of people who like to censor, and that's just as likely on the right as it is on the left. So, no, it's a real dangerous game.
Is it a problem like the term critical race theory it's open to interpretation?
Yeah, well, it's often even hard, except in retrospect, to understand a lot of what these things actually are, because new clouds of ideas emerge, and they kind of have an animating spirit, and they have a set of associated, what would you say, presumptions, and you can often only see what that is in retrospect. It took me a long time to understand whatever existentialism was, enough to sort of define it, phenomenology, these different schools of thought that occupied the thoughts of psychological investigators over a couple of centuries, postmodernism, modernism. It's not an easy thing to extract out the gist of those and define them. Plus, as I said, they have very fuzzy boundaries. So,
well, what I saw with DeSantis was there was he had a concern that it wasn't just Black history that they were putting into this critical race theory, but that he saw that there was queer theory, which was in this thing that they were teaching in school. And like, how does that have anything to do with Black history? Like, why is...
So I'm just taking a guess here, but if you have queer theory as part of Black history, my guess is in that portion of the class, you're going to learn about, say, James Baldwin, who was Black and gay and a civil rights icon, or Bayard Rustin, same thing, or perhaps James Brown, right? Like, the idea that queer theory would mean what? The teacher is trying to prod the kids to be gay or play with their sexual orientation or their sexual identity. I mean, that seems like it's the implication, but that's not the reality, of course. So, and remember, this is what DeSantis did. He banned AP African American Studies. That makes no sense. I mean, this is clearly an integral part of American history, and it deserves, to be explored on its own merits in its own class. And he bans it as if it's like, heresy, as if there's something wrong with that field of study. And to his credit, yet again, Jordan Peterson is saying, well, hold on there. You're going too far. This is a slippery slope. If you don't like some of these ideas, debate these ideas and get that going in the classroom. This is the whole idea. Kids are supposed to learn and debate and expand their mind and their horizons in these classrooms. Now, furthermore, to get to the whole critical race theory idea, so what is critical race theory? Well, let's read about it. Critical race theory is a cross-disciplinary examination by social and civil rights scholars and activists of how laws, social and political movements, and media shape and are shaped by social conceptions of race and ethnicity. Goals include challenging all mainstream and alternative views of racism and racial justice, including conservative, liberal, and progressive. The word critical in the name is an academic reference to critical thinking, critical theory, and scholarly criticism, rather than criticizing or blaming people. CRT is also used in sociology to explain social, political, and legal structures and power distribution as through a lens focusing on the concept of race and experiences of racism. For example, the CRT conceptual framework examines racial bias in laws and legal institutions, such as highly disparate rates of incarceration among racial groups in the U.S. A key CRT concept is intersectionality, the way in which different forms of inequality and identity are affected by interconnections of race, class, gender, and disability. Scholars of CRT view race as a social construct with no biological basis. One tenet of CRT is that racism and disparate racial outcomes are the result of complex, changing, and often subtle social and institutional dynamics rather than explicit and intentional prejudices of individuals. So in other words, look, that's a really important point. In other words, what CRT advocates is the problem isn't just like individual racists who are bad people, who are bigots, and they are trying to spread their bigotry, and they are trying to actively keep, minorities down. The point that they make is, no, it's like a really complex, nuanced, systemic problem that we're dealing with. Like, that's where racism is most pernicious, is these legal structures and frameworks that were set up that aren't even intentionally racist, but they can have effectively racist outcomes. And it could even be with like the purest of intentions, these systems could be built, but you get some disparate outcomes as a result of it. Now, look, this idea, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, and I'm sure there's aspects of CRT I agree with, and I'm sure there's aspects I disagree with, but all this is definitely debatable, right? And this all should definitely be in the classroom. The idea that this is, beyond the realm of reason is preposterous, honestly. So, look, shout out to Jordan Peterson surprising me on this one, thinking DeSantis is going too far, cracking down on CRT, cracking down on AP African American Studies. really did shock me. He's being principled with this whole free speech, free expression, debate the ideas approach, and this is not something you see on the right. Certainly not in modern day. Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, Matt Walsh, all these guys flip on their professed love of the First Amendment and open debate and discussion like this whenever the moment suits them. So, shocking. But I will also say, for those of you who haven't checked out this whole podcast, boy, buckle up if you do, because it's a wild ride. Jordan gets like kind of weirdly religious at certain points. That was bizarre. And then he talks about this new initiative he's doing, this like group that's got like policy goals, but the policy goals are not really all that policy related, and it's just a very, very weird, very weird podcast. Very strange. If you guys check it out, let me know what you think. But this part I'm showing you here is probably his least bad moment, where he's like, hey, maybe not a good idea to just start banning classes that you personally don't like if you're a conservative. Virtually everything else in this podcast is like, bro, what? Anyway, there you have it. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.